We have with us Paul Collier, who is now in Lisbon to talk about fragile states and the issues regarding natural resources. Paul, as we all know, published a very influential book called The Bottom Billion almost 12 years ago, which is, when you think about it, it seems like yesterday. And I would like to start with that, Paul, if that's possible. Revisiting the book and the argument, do you still think it stands? And where would you, because at the end of the book you give some policy advice and advices. So where would you, how would you rewrite the book today? Because it's 12 years, it's like so much time.
Look, I've obviously learned a lot more since, but unfortunately, I think the basic thesis of the book was not only right then, I think it's actually still right. That unfortunately there are a group of countries at the bottom of the world economy who've largely been bypassed by rising global prosperity and are still struggling. Some have escaped, but not many. Transformation is hard, and that's what we're talking about. It's the transformation out of being trapped in a syndrome that keeps you in poverty. And I think the Bottom Billion didn't do a bad job at sort of explaining the nature of the traps. I would write a different and better book now, and I will, but I think it's still, unfortunately, valid. Okay,
and I think that one of the issues when I was rereading it for this interview, at some points I just suddenly realized that, for instance, one of the traps could actually apply to some European countries at the moment, which is the issue of governance, which is, I think, your fourth trap when you identify common trends within these countries, which is issues, for instance, such as illiberal democracy, issues regarding rule of law. So in that sense, some of the traps they are not exclusive to underdeveloped or developing countries in that sense.
Far from it.
Far from it.
Last year, together with Tim Besley at the London School of Economics, we co-directed a commission on state fragility. It was chaired by Donald Kaberuka and David Cameron, so serious stuff. But nowhere there did we have a list of fragile countries. We think that's a mistaken idea. It's not that there are a group of fragile countries, it's that there are conditions of fragility which can apply to any country. And some of the problems which I've been seeing and studying for 40 plus years in poor countries, as you imply, are now starting to develop in OECD countries. It's not just the governance, it's these widening rifts, both economic rifts between people and psychological rifts, where people no longer see themselves as having a shared identity with their fellow citizens, and this is the beginnings of a very dangerous process, I think, if it's not corrected. I think Europeans imagine and Americans imagine that there's some sort of gold dust in the European and North American.
Immune to everything. Yes.
We're for some reason wonderful and always will be. And the problems of the rest of the world are just their problems. But they're generic problems that can happen in any society. And they're now starting to become important in our own societies. Which is why I turned from the Bottom Billion
to your last book, right?
Indeed.
The future of capitalism, facing the new
And I couldn't have
anxieties.
written
Yeah.
The Future of Capitalism Facing New Anxieties without 40 years of experience on the because in the poorest countries, this is what's happening in our own countries is sometimes very starkly visible. The divisions of us versus them, the sense of grievance against some other group.
The collapse of the centre or
Yes,
the moderates.
absolutely. And though to be fair, some of that rhetoric of the extremes is actually compounded by the new technology.
Yes.
I mean, the Silicon Valley wants to claim it's saving the world,
but in some
actually,
sense, it's actually doing the opposite.
it's some very dangerous stuff
I would
going
agree
on.
with you.
So not my own research, but what others have shown is that the algorithms that sort of Facebook and Google are using, this amazing technology, the algorithms are a complete black box, artificial intelligence with plus 1 billion bits of data have cracked the problem of that Facebook and Google need to have cracked. But the problem they need to have cracked is not how to make the world a better place, it's how to keep people on that screen. Because the longer they're on screen, the more ads they sell. And they've discovered the way to keep people on that screen is by entertaining them
And feeding them what they want to hear.
Worse than that. Worse than that. Things that they'll find intriguingly outrageous, intriguingly sensational. And so if you start watching a Hillary Clinton video, they'll feed you stuff when before long you're watching conspiracy theories. If you start watching a Trump video, before long you're into Islamophobia or something, and so this polarizing. Now, of course, in America, in Europe, it's worrisome, it's certainly irritating, but we've got other sources of good information. But in the sort of countries that I work on, where all people depend on for knowledge is go on the internet, right? There, this polarizing force
has a greater impact.
Yes, there's no countervailing force of the center ground truth. And so it's very, very dangerous. And the fools in Silicon Valley are so ignorant of the consequences of what they're doing, they don't even realize it. Right? They're now proposing to set up an international currency, the Libra, right? Called Libra because freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from government, which is the problem, right? And who's it going to be run by, the Libra? A bunch of big corporations. Oh, we can trust them, can't we, right? I mean, this is ethically disgraceful, this purposive dismantling of government in the commercial interest of a handful of companies. We need to do something about it.
No, I think, and even all of that has huge impact in the political process also, in the sense that we were talking before about how in some countries it is the center left that's collapsing, in other countries it's the center right that's actually collapsing.
That's right.
And here in your book, what are the advices or the clues that you can give us into, in a sense, construct a bridge across this increasing polarization that we see in many issues, political, economic, social, and I think one point that you do focus very well, it's the resurgence of the grievances narrative.
Yes, that's right. So the book is really an attempt to re-establish the centre, not an apologetic centre, it's what I call a hard centre.
Hard centre.
Yes, a hard centre that commands the centre ground and makes the others look the wretchedness that they are, right? And the essence of the hard centre is healing the new anxieties. The subtitle of the book,
Yes.
Facing the New Anxieties. So what are these new anxieties? Periodically capitalism derails. It's its nature to derail. That doesn't mean we need to get rid of it. It's the only system we've had which is capable of driving up all living standards. But it doesn't do that on autopilot. And so if you leave it on autopilot, over the course of 20 years or so, it's quite likely to derail.
Yes, absolutely.
It's derailed now. It's derailed big time, which started around 1980. So we've had 40 years of progressive derailment in which the poorer regions have got poorer relative to the successful metropoles, and the less skilled people with manual skills have got poorer relative to the well-educated people with fancy skills. And so we've had one bunch of people on a 40-year up escalator.
Yes, absolutely.
Who think we're just doing great. And they think, why are they doing so well? Because we deserve it. We've got all these skills, and aren't we clever? And then there's another group that's been on a down escalator for 40 years, and they feel neglected, abandoned, angry.
Angry.
And you can't blame them. Now, of course, they don't have any solutions. You know, in Britain they voted for Brexit, in America they voted for Trump. Brexit and Trump are not going to provide solutions for them, they're going to deepen their problems. But you can't blame them for being angry. The people I'm angry with are the successful people who walked away from their obligations to others, instead of using their position to actually address the new anxieties that were being thrown up. It's not a new thing that capitalism derails.
No, it does.
It keeps derailing. The first big derailment was in the 1840s, about 50 years after capitalism had started. And it was in the northern cities of England where capitalism was invented, and where I was born. I was born 10 miles from the first factory on Earth, the World Heritage Centre. Right? My German grandfather moved from an impoverished German village to the fastest growing city in the whole of Europe, Bradford.
Bradford?
Yes. And Bradford was highly productive. All the mills clustered together, so people crowded in. And by the 1840s, it was the nearest we've ever got to hell on earth outside the context of war. Because when you crowd people together and have no public policy
at all,
you get a health crisis. 1849, cholera breaks out in Bradford. Now, the Mr. Big in Bradford, the local billionaire, he owned the main factories, he was the mayor, he was also the local MP, he was Mr. Big, tight as salt, right? But the fact that thousands of his employees and citizens were dying on him seems to have seared his soul, because he became the first industrial philanthropist. He gave away his entire fortune. He was Bill Gates before Bill Gates, right? And he built the first purpose-built town for his workers on Earth. He was tight as salt. It was called Saltaire. It's now a World Heritage Centre, right? Yes. The rest of his fortune he gave away to the people of Bradford. And they responded. Both the workforce was loyal, and the people of Bradford celebrated him. There's a great statue there. He's still a hero in Bradford, right? That was responsible capitalism, recognizing obligations. Just a few miles away from Bradford is Rochdale. Rochdale. By the 1840s, that's also hell on earth. And their families get together and they say, we're facing these new anxieties, we better club together to try and deal with them. And so what happened in Rochdale was what's called the Rochdale Pioneers. It was the world birth of the cooperative movement.
Yes.
And, you know, if on average, life expectancy in those northern cities fell to 19 years. By 19, on average, you were dead. And so one of the big concerns was, are you going to get a funeral? So the cooperative movement became the biggest funeral director in Britain. Another question was, where are you going to live? So in Halifax, another northern town, they banded together and created a building society, a savings and loan, a mini bank. It grew to be the biggest bank in Britain.
Yes.
as a cooperative. Was then handed over, demutualised, handed over to the brilliant financial community in the City of London, and in 25 years they took it from being the biggest bank in the country to bankrupt. Right? It had taken 150 years of the cooperative movement to build it, and 25 years of these whiz kids to bankrupt it. Right? So that was the proper, pragmatic, ethical responses to a derailment in the 1840s. And the tragedy is that the derailment that started in the 1980s, this time we've not been pragmatic. We've not done anything about it.
And your book tries to address that precisely.
Yes, it tries to explain why we had this neglect, which was political, but also what we can do. It is perfectly fixable, these new rifts, just as the health crisis in the industrial cities was perfectly fixable. Right? There what we needed to do was put in sewage that separated the drinking water from the sewage, right? And we needed clean this and clean that. And gradually that was done. But this time nothing's been done. We need to redistribute productivity spatially so that where people belong, they can get some productive jobs. Mm-hmm. That's perfectly feasible, but it takes active public policy. The answer in Britain can't be the only productive jobs are in London. That won't work.
No,
that can't work anywhere.
No,
right?
The country is not London.
Yes, and so we've got to have an active policy that takes productive jobs to each region, so that each region has a productive city. That's perfectly feasible. We actually know how to do that. It's just we've not done it. Mm. And the other side of the chain is what I call the social maternal chain of how do you turn a baby born with a brain but no mind into a 24-year-old that's equipped with a mind. A brain is an individual endowment. A mind is a social construct. And we want a 24-year-old that's got a mind that equips them to be productive and motivates them to contribute to society.
I think that's perhaps one of the greatest tasks of universities and schools today.
Yes.
Even more so.
Yes, but let's think, how do you turn that baby into a productive 24-year-old that's ethically motivated to want to contribute? And we can split it into 4 phases. First phase, from age 0 to 3. There's only one system that we know works and has ever worked. It's called the family.
Family.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so we need to strengthen families. Britain's done a terrible job of actually weakening families. Things that are called children's rights are actually just transferring rights from the family to bossy people in social services who are then in turn bossed around right up the top of the system. And the hierarchical system in Britain is basically keep scandal out of the newspapers. Right? And so everybody's subject to targets and performance monitoring, no trust in the system. So 86% of a social worker's time is spent administering the system. There's only 14% of a social worker's time spent with a family. But what is that 14% spent on? Getting the data off the family to feed the 86% of the form filling. Right? The central role of social workers in that system is scrutiny of families. If you're scrutinizing a family, the family can't trust you. And so these highly stressed families with difficult kids that need help, instead of help, they're being bullied. Right? Britain's taken 70,000 kids off troubled families, and then it doesn't know how to look after them. Right? It puts them in temporary paid care, which is, if you think about it, cannot possibly work, and it doesn't. So that's reforming the system, what I call social paternalism, supporting families 0 to 3. We know that if a kid's damaged by 3, it's largely irreversible, actually. Then from 3 to 6, in my experience, the best system in Europe is the École Maternelle in France, where people, it's free, it's standard. Because it's free and it's standard, everybody sends their kids there. Because everybody sends their kids, the poorest families send their kids. what you learn in École Maternelle, you learn to be socialised. Then from 6 up to 17, the best in Europe, I think, is Finland. And Finland, the system is you just make teaching a very prestigious profession, well paid, and then you trust the teachers, because they've got all the tacit knowledge.
And we all know that a good teacher can make a difference in your life.
Exactly.
It did in mine.
And in mine.
Absolutely.
You know, both my parents left school, they were 12. I was saved by a good teacher who inspired me, you know. So Finland does it. Britain doesn't. Britain does almost the opposite. Teachers are at the bottom of this monitored paternalistic system where you get bonuses for performance, but you're monitored, you're not trusted. And then it flows through the children. Test, 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 test. The Finns only test the children at the end in the PISA scores.
Yes.
But very embarrassingly, they perform up there and Britain's down here.
Yes.
And then final step. So we've gone through the family,
So
0
we get
to
to
3,
college.
the École Maternelle, and then school. Well, some form of tertiary education, but it doesn't have to be universities, you know. Britain has 3 of the top 10 universities on earth. If you're in the top part of the cognitively gifted in Britain, Britain's the best place on earth.
Oh, it is.
But if you're in the bottom half of the population for cognitive gifts, it's the worst place in the OECD. It's terrible because there's nothing for you. The vocational training system in Britain's collapsed. The best in Europe for vocational training is Switzerland. Switzerland also has a world top 10 university, but 60% of Swiss kids choose the vocational route. It's equally prestigious. You can end up being the chief executive of the Swiss bank through the vocational route. Right? The vocational route is you get a prestigious credential, it's 3 or 4 years, it's paid. It's wildly expensive. Half of the costs are paid by firms. Because firms
have an interest in having professionals.
My
Absolutely.
goodness,
Yes.
they make sure that those kids are taught skills that are useful for that firm in that city now. And so, because the firms have got a skin in the game, they're involved. We could do that. Every country in Europe could build that social maternal chain with best in class all the way along, right? And of course it would have to be fine-tuned for the conditions in the country. And that would be a process of social learning. We'd learn what worked. But instead, what we've got is ideologies that have just, certainly in Britain, messed up every damn stage of that chain. So, just to put it all together, we need a chain that produces a skilled and motivated 24-year-old. And then we need a process in which firms have got a responsibility and incentives to go to provincial cities and provide purposive jobs. Those are the two halves
of the heart centre.
Yeah, of the heart centre.
Of the heart centre.
And it's doable because it's already done bits in different countries. And the tragedy is that we haven't done it. Fortunately, there's an awful lot of the future left, right?
So we do end on an optimistic note.
Yes. Yes, the whole book's an optimistic book because it says, here are the new anxieties. They've been neglected. No wonder our societies are blowing up. Well, we can fix them. We fixed the derailments in the past when we were much poorer. It's ridiculous that we've not fixed the present derailments. They're no more difficult. We need to do it. There's been a failure of politics, and that can be put right by citizens realizing that that's the failure. Yeah? That's why citizens need to watch something like this and work out the implications for their own action.
Yes,
The book is full of vignettes of people who can make a difference in their communities. It's not just national politics, it's what you can do in your own community.
Yes, I think that's probably one of the pillars of your book, and of a way of, you know, getting across what is sometimes thought of as something outside of these developed societies. But at the end of the day, when we look at history, we see that at some point developed societies become complacent.
Yes.
And in that sense, I think that your book is a good reminder that we cannot no longer, we don't have the luxury to continue to be complacent. We need to get our hands on the job and do it ourselves.
In the end, citizens get the country, they get the politics we deserve.
Okay.
I think at the moment we deserve better than we've got.
Or at least we should try to do that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we should try to change and help in any way that we can.
Indeed.
Thank you, Paul, so much for this wonderful conversation. And please, this is a very thought-provoking book, which I strongly emphasize that you read. And then I'm sure that if you disagree with the book, Paul will be very happy to talk and disagree with you, which I think is something that you do very well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.